risk and reward, light and darkness. These fundamental dichotomies rule our lives. But this year, I decided to do something a little different. I decided to look at how risk is involved in our lives, how it's been ingrained in our philosophies, in our histories, and in our current culture today. So, join me for this 3-part documentary series as we analyze what risk is.
But before we get any further, let's first define what risk is. While risk is the possibility of loss or injury, it's really something more than that. It's a word that represents how we choose to live our lives. And so in this episode, I wanted to understand how different cultures and philosophers understood how we should interact with risk in our daily lives. So let's start off with Buddhism. Now, Buddhism is founded on 4 fundamental noble truths. Number 1, life is suffering. Number 2, the cause of suffering is craving. Number 3, the end of suffering comes with an end to craving. Number 4, there is a path which leads one away from craving and suffering. Now this is the Eightfold Path, and through this path one can reach enlightenment.
Because Buddhism believes that life is suffering, I think that it could be a very risk-averse culture.
Risk is a part of life, and since life is suffering, risk is also suffering. Instead of risking something, wanting something, craving something, Buddhism preaches a renouncing of those desires.
But I wanted to talk to someone who knew more about Buddhism than me, so I called Eduardo Dravan.
He saw Buddhist risk tolerance in a different way.
I think the meditative journey involves enormous risks. In fact, it was toward the end of my academic career, while I was introducing meditation into the classroom, I started to develop a certain trepidation about that, because I was recognizing what was taking place in myself, and I knew enough to know that I'm introducing students to something that is radical, stopping, pausing to observe one's neuroses and one's collective neuroses that will turn your world inside out. I don't see Buddhism as a retreat. I don't see meditation as a way of removing oneself from the world. For me, it has become the way of getting in touch with reality.
So after understanding Buddhism in a new light, I decided to look to ancient Greece to understand how their mythology and philosophy tolerates risk, and what lessons we can learn for our own lives.
What I noticed was that while Buddhism focuses a lot on the path towards enlightenment, Greek mythology takes a different turn. It focuses on cautionary tales of mortals and shows their hubris.
The Greek gods of Mount Olympus all reflect different aspects of mortal life. The stories of the Greek cosmogony all reflect Greek values and beliefs. A lot of them revolve around heroes taking enormous risks, using their cunning to trick the gods, and then, most frequently, becoming overconfident and, through their own hubris, end up paying the consequences for their actions. Now, Greece is also called the birthplace of Western philosophy for a reason. Philosophers coming out of ancient Greece like Socrates, Plato, and Diogenes all preach mentalities that recommend leaning into risk instead of away from it.
Socrates, using his Socratic method, questioned even the most fundamental truth. As he said, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing."
In the process of questioning these basic assumptions, he ruffled some feathers in the Athens aristocracy, which ended up costing him his life. So we have 2 examples. One culture that believes that life is suffering, and one that believes that a life without suffering and glory is not a life meant to be lived. So let's see a third option. Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher alive in the 19th century, created what is called now existentialist and nihilist philosophy.
He posited that there was no universal truth or meaning in the world.
As he said, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. The difference between nihilists and existentialists is that existentialists believe that we can attribute meaning to things, whereas nihilists believe that even the things we try to attribute meaning to are meaningless.
Even though he was more of a nihilist, he outlined one of the most important existentialist philosophies, the Übermensch.
He says that on one side of life is savagery in a world without meaning and there is only hedonism and desire, and then on the other side is the Übermensch, a person who lives by their own principles and overcomes obstacles in the route to self-improvement. I think this theory, in a way, harmonizes the two belief structures we went over previously. It takes the self-reflection of Buddhism and the risk tolerance of ancient Greece to create the best self, or Übermensch. To me, this quest towards becoming an Übermensch represents the correct balance between risks and rules. This Übermensch mentality has been expounded upon by more modern philosophers, such as Albert Camus, who was a 20th century French philosopher who saw Nietzsche's existentialism as freeing. Instead of worrying about fitting in with society, the fact that nothing mattered freed him to live his own life.
He dared to take risks and fail, and through that, he improved. He lived authentically, which I think is the bravest thing you can do. The great thing is that all of these ideologies have their own merits and can help us to navigate the risks in our own lives. So, join me next time as we examine a place where people went to embrace risk. Pack your cowboy boots. We're going to the American West.